gotta tell somebody.
This is the best thing I've ever seen.
That. Let's talk about that.
You need this. Listen to this.
Memorable and exciting.
Well, then be less boring.
I'm going to tell everyone. Wait here.
Mighty remarkable, Big Daddy.
Remarkable.
Welcome to Remarkable, a podcast for B2B marketers that deconstructs the most iconic moments in film, television, pop culture, and advertising for a single purpose: to give you, the B2B marketer, the same storytelling techniques that the pros use. In each episode, you will learn techniques from Hollywood, Pixar, Marvel, and beyond, from Spielberg's hands to yours, bringing remarkable content ideas to you every single week. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. This is Remarkable. This week, we're talking about B2B marketing lessons from pro women athlete sponsorships with the help of our special guest, the CEO of PARITY.
For every woman, every girl who dares to see herself as something more than a body to be rated, a score to be kept. When I play, I keep my own score. When I play, I know who I am. When I play, I forget how it feels to be boxed in, to be boxed out. When I play, I feel no shame. When I play, I remember how it feels to be free.
Leela, how are you?
I'm doing great, Ian. It's always so nice to see you.
Always wonderful chatting with you. And this is like such a special time because we've done a handful of podcasts together over the years and other sort of fun chats. But you have this new role, this super fun company. It's something that like is a perfect topic to discuss for B2B, which is something that's not very common in B2B yet. So why are we talking about this today? Why did you decide to go to PARITY?
Oh my goodness. What a fun question. So Ian, you know me as a marketer by trade, right? I spent 13 years in and around tech marketing in a variety of roles. The last 3 were CMO roles. I took something away from each of them. I realized, just having gone back and thought about it, I was CMO at companies series A, B, C, D, pre-IPO and post-IPO. So I covered a lot.
There you go.
Roles. And I love marketing, but as I was exiting my last CMO role, I was debating whether the right thing to do was go off and be a 4-time CMO or if I should explore other things. And while I was having that internal debate, this email magically sailed into my inbox from a company I'd never heard of, or rather from a headhunter introducing a company I'd never heard of. And that company was called PARITY. And what the recruiter couldn't have known, because it's not something I've really got out there on my LinkedIn profile, say, is I am a lifelong fan of sport. I grew up watching every sport under the sun. My mom and dad just kind of ingrained that in me from an early age. I played high school field hockey and tennis. And I've just always really admired athletes, and I love what sports bring out in people. I had never, not once, considered working in sport. But when I read about PARITY and started to understand some of the challenges, the many challenges that professional women athletes have faced over time in fighting for what should be theirs, I became completely obsessed with the problem and doing anything I could to help solve it. And I'll also add, I wasn't out there looking for a CEO role specifically, but as I got more and more obsessed with this problem, and as I leaned into the team at PARITY to discuss it, I realized that actually the skills I had built in 3 CMO stints at different sizes of company were actually pretty good grounding for coming in as a CEO of a small company. So I'd love to pretend it was sort of some deliberate path that I sought out. It was, as life often is, it was much more sort of serendipitous than that, but it was very clearly the right choice for me. And I could not be more thrilled and energized and humbled to have the opportunity.
When I read about the news of what you were doing, and I can't remember if you sent a cryptic email saying something along the lines of like, I'll talk to you soon and in a different fashion. But, it really, to me, as an outsider who just knows you as a marketer, I was like, oh, she's a perfect CEO. So, it's perfectly fit. We're always excited when CMOs become CEOs. But I think that it's a logical progression. It depends on the type of companies. Like, obviously, the more B2C you are, or like B2B2C you are, the more control you have over revenue, the closer you are to becoming a CEO anyways, honestly. And so, anyways, I think it's logical progression for a lot of CMOs, truthfully, specifically with you. I think it's a perfect fit. And, you're fantastic. So who better?
Oh, Ian, thank you. You're making me blush here.
All right. Well, no more blushing. We got work to do. So today we're talking about pro women athlete sponsorships. And what is this? Like, what would you define a pro women athlete sponsorship as?
Well, that's one of the interesting things that I've discovered in kind of digging in with PARITY. And maybe just for context for your audience, PARITY's been around for about 4 years. We are a sports marketing company. We focus on sponsorships for professional women athletes. We're all about the athletes, and we really do focus on that pro athlete as opposed to looking at the broader spectrum of college and high school and other types of athlete. Today, we work with over 1,100 professional women athletes from 80 sports. It includes over 260 Olympians and Paralympians, representatives playing for all the top leagues that you can think of. And it's really this marvelously diverse set of women athletes. What all of them have in common is they don't earn enough from playing their sport.
I've said this many times. The WNBA doesn't pay my bills. Playing here doesn't pay my bills. We make more money overseas.
So historically, women athletes simply have not been paid in line with their efforts and, what they're delivering back to their audiences. There are many, many reasons for that, which we can certainly go into. But PARITY basically exists to try and close that gender income and opportunity gap that we see in professional sports.
A recent CNN analysis found that internationally, women playing in the 2023 World Cup earned 25 cents to the dollar of the men, a quadruple jump from the last cup, but still far below their peers. Other pro sports have also seen low wages for women.
And the way we do that is we go out and we talk to companies of all shapes and sizes, both B2B and B2C. And first of all, try and help them understand the opportunities in women's sports, but then also get creative with them in terms of how they can work with professional women athletes. So to your question of like, what does a sponsorship or a partnership with a professional woman athlete look like? In our opinion, the sky's the limit. There are so many different ways that these women, very talented women, can partner with brands to help elevate those brands. The most common ways that we see are brands and athletes teaming up for content creation on social platforms and elsewhere, brand storytelling.
Yo, my flight to Paris leaves in less than 10 days, so let's start packing. I'm so excited to be working with Ipsy on this because so many Ipsy products were already going to be in my suitcase, so let me show you a few of my favorites. First, the glam bags. So I've had my glam bag subscription for almost a year now, and I love these little bags. They help me stay organized on the go, and I keep this one in my volleyball bag with all of these mini perfumes in it so that when I'm super sweaty after practice, I can still smell good.
And one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing is trying to find that ideal fit, that ideal alignment between the athlete and the brand in terms of values and causes and affinity for specific products or, other attributes that make them absolutely the right match for that brand and what that brand's trying to accomplish. But we've also had great success at placing athletes for keynote speaking, for example, because every athlete has just an incredible story to share out with whoever that audience is, whether it's internal or external. We've also seen, and you know this full and well, of course, kind of the return to in-person experiences post-COVID. A lot of brands, both on the B2B and B2C side, really looking to create experiences for their audiences. And we found that injecting athletes into said experience really just creates a different angle, different energy, provides a talking point for, and really makes that event something really special in the minds of the attendees. We've even seen brands leaning into how they can partner with these athletes for R&D, for input on products and whatever offerings that company has. So, those are the top of mind things, but we just love brainstorming with brands, different ways that make sense for that brand to engage an athlete for some type of partnership.
And we'll get a bunch more into PARITY here later on in the episode, but most of the time you're working with marketers, right?
Yes. It's brand teams, it's marketers, it's sponsorship, partnership teams. It just depends on how the company's structured. Sometimes it's agencies, if they prefer to have a different party kind of vet things. At smaller companies, we might be working with someone else in the C-suite. It really just depends on the company that we're working with. But yes, I would say marketers are the most common sort of body of clients, if you will.
Meredith, What the heck is the history of pro women athlete sponsorships?
So they've been around for a long time, and it's hard to track down like when the first one would have been, but the New York Times had an article that was like all about this.
That is Meredith O'Neill, our amazing producer extraordinaire.
They said that around 1933 was kind of like the first real pro female athlete sponsorship. That's when Babe Didrikson Zaharias was in some local ads for a Dodge car. And she was an Olympic gold medalist. She's a world record holder. She did multiple sports, which was really impressive. And she actually founded the Ladies Pro Golf Association. So she's like loosely the first female athlete to endorse a national consumer product. It's very specific because, again, it's hard to track down kind of the first one. But I feel like this is a really timely episode because of the Paris Olympics, especially since it was the most gender equal in history. Still not equal, but the most gender equal in history. So the most even split of male to female athletes as well as commentators. Again, there's still discrepancies in pay and things like that. But the Olympics itself is unpaid. And I was looking into like, what do they earn? If you earn a gold medal, I saw sort of a range, but I saw around $37,500 was like the bonus that people get. But if you don't earn a medal, there's no bonus, right? There's no pay. So athletes are also earning through sponsorships. And I saw this article. This is from a local article in Maine, but it was the Dean of Business at the University of New England, Norm O'Reilly, who sort of explained the benefit to the sponsors, the athletes, and also the sport as well. He said, you start drawing people in who really didn't have an interest before in that particular sport as a spectator. And then they're watching it on television, they're streaming it, they're buying merchandise, they're going to games, they're talking about that athlete. And then that just all combines to generate that growth. To look at some of the sponsorships from Olympic athletes, specifically female Olympic athletes, Simone Biles, a gymnast, is sponsored by Visa, Powerade, United Airlines. According to Forbes, she earned around $7 million in 2023, including her sponsorships. That's not just sponsorships. And she is the 16th highest paid female athlete in the world. Rugby player Ilona Maher is sponsored by L'Oreal, Secret, and the New Deal. Katie Ledecky, the swimmer, signed a $7 million partnership with TYR. I know it's the popular swimming brand. She also has a 5-year contract with Athleta and so on. Sprinter Sha'Carri Richardson has a deal with Nike. That's for an undisclosed amount, but she's believed to be one of the highest paid female athletes in the Olympics. So they make a significant amount of money through these sponsorships. And though their the benefit to the athletes is very sort of easy to quantify. We've talked a little bit about the ROI for the company sponsoring them is sort of harder to put a value on. But these sponsorships have seen tons of growth recently, especially since viewership of women's sports has increased dramatically. But the number of deals has increased by around 22% year over year. And that's according to a report from Sponsor United. And this next one I got from the PARITY website, there's around $1.3 billion in projected revenue this year from pro women athlete sponsorships. And women's sports fans are 2.8 times more likely to purchase a product based on a female athlete's recommendation. If Ilona Maher was I love this product from L'Oreal, I would honestly buy it. I love her. I follow her on.
Yeah, I'm in.
Yeah. I follow her on
the rest of the universe. Yeah.
Yeah, she's just so charismatic. I love it. And yeah, so it makes sense. And as far as the market, the global sports sponsorship market is expected to grow to almost $108 billion by 2030. So
yes. And Meredith, let me just draw the connection that you just made there. So the 1.3 billion number was published by Deloitte late last year. So 1.3 billion out of, what did you just say? 100 and how many billion?
108.
Yes. So think about how popular women athletes are today and how much momentum there is in women's sports. And for there still to be 1% or less of the global market flowing towards women's sports and women athletes, to my mind, is bonkers and requires some attention.
You don't have to be a math major to figure that one out. You know what I mean? Clearly, we know I like the words, but, the numbers are compelling too. Well, so Leela, when we caught up, and I said he should come on our podcast. And, one of the first things that I thought of, as a sort of lifelong sports fan and someone who follows sports, I would say less closely in the last 3 years because I have a 3-year-old, but still closely. And I was telling you that there's this story about there's this investor that was like, hey, if you were looking to sort of make a buck in sports and you and don't know where to go, you should look at buying an NWSL team. And this was like in like 2018. And somebody bought it's the San Diego team. Oh my gosh, their name escapes me. What is it?
San Diego Wave.
Yeah, the Wave. And, like they bought it for, feels like next to nothing. And now it's like 100x the valuation. And it's a fascinating thing to me because I think for so long, sports is really just driven by TV rights. Like if you were to this is a generalization and I'm not an expert, but like if you look at the growth of the NFL is lockstep with how they've been able to get these massive contracts. NBA, like the fact that they have all these games, same thing. College sports, baseball, like all the stuff is how they are able to negotiate this stuff. So as you see sort of social changing, you see, women's sports increasing, you see all that stuff, there's sort of a paradigm shift happening where like going to games is now really interesting again. And like if you look at like Chelsea soccer team or some of these that are selling out 60,000 person stadiums, doing all this stuff, you can tell the grassroots with your eyes how well they're doing, but you can't tell superficially how they're doing because they don't have the same broadcast partners, right? So it's like good luck trying to go find a women's soccer game to watch on TV because it's much harder to find. But if you go to the actual stadiums and see the actual fans, that's where you see, all of the excitement. And that's like a really weird thing because if you're a person who's just sitting there on the sidelines who has no idea about any of this, well, how would you even ever know that, there's a sold out women's soccer stadium, for example, right? You would never know.
Now, I will say things have gotten better with the advent of streaming, right? Because that's loosened the spigot a little bit. And, even the USL Super League, which just launched, a couple of weeks ago. So this is a brand new Division 1 soccer league to rival the NWSL, although it's quite complementary just given that they're playing seasons. But that just launched. I was at the season opener at Tampa Bay Sun FC, taking on the Dallas team. And what I will say is I checked into my hotel in Tampa and the fellow behind the counter said, "Oh, what brings you to Tampa?" And I said, "Well, I'm off to see the first ever USL Super League game." And he looked at me blankly. So the message is still getting out, but all of those games are being broadcast on streaming. So you can find those games now. And we've seen this reflected in the media share. So, going back a few years, women's sports had less than 5% share of media time. And now it's up to, last time it was measured about 15%. So still not enough, but certainly moving in the right direction thanks to streaming platforms.
And and I think that this is like a really important, I think, distinction to talk about women's sports in general, because you can't talk about sponsorships of women's, women athletes, specifically pro athletes, until you sort of talk about the general landscape. And I think why it's important. I think the adage 5 years ago, 6 years ago was you can't make money in women's sports. That's what people said, right? So then it's like, the San Diego Waves, goes from 3 million to selling for 120 million. And you go, oh, I guess you can. I guess you can actually make a ton. And then you look at some of the, athletes that get a bunch of coverage, Katie Ledecky being one, or Caitlin Clark being another, or, a bunch of the, historical sort of figures on the U.S. women's soccer team, people like that these people are like mega celebrities, right? And again, they get all this coverage, and then you go, well, why couldn't there be a lot more of that? Right. And then you go, oh, there's just a massive gap. And where there's a gap, there's an opportunity. And it's like, again, I think that the people who had the money to look at things like this were looking a different direction. Right.
Yeah. I think Sportico, the last Sportico list I saw of the top 50 athlete earners of all time had either 0 or 1 woman in that list. The one woman would be. Do you?
No, who would it be?
Serena Williams.
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course. Duh. Of course.
But it was, if Serena was in there, she was definitely the only one at that point. And, something I didn't say earlier, when we talk about parity in the athletes that we represent, we work with what I like to call the next 99% of athletes. Because I think one of the things that is true in this quote unquote rush to women's sports that we're seeing is people are rushing to the same properties, to the same athletes. It's not much of a risk to put money into sponsoring Simone Biles or Katie Ledecky or Caitlin Clark. And it's not much of a risk, or at least it's less of a risk, to put money into the WNBA right now, for example, or the NWSL. But there's this whole glorious world of sports beyond that top 1% of athletes that I think are actually a fantastic opportunity for brands of all shapes and sizes. Because let's face it, not everybody has the budget to work with Caitlin Clark or Katie Ledecky. But the good news is there's an athlete or a team or a sports property that's out there for every brand, just based on what you're trying to accomplish and what your budget is.
Yeah, and there's also, they might not be the right brand story for you. Like if you're an underdog company, you can't go sponsor Katie Ledecky, who's been destroying people by 3 lengths of the pool for a decade. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm the underdog who's literally beat everyone since I was, 10 years old. But I think that, yeah, so to your point, it's like, this is what's so exciting about this. It's like, there's 99.9% of women athletes that have never been sponsored that there's a huge opportunity for. There's a growing, very voracious fan base that support those sports. And now you're getting the effects of streaming and other things like that and social media, which are sort of able to catapult those to another level. And like, this is where you get into like, okay, well, now you're de-risking the entire thing, right? It's like if the NWSL is getting more coverage, if, women's sports in general are getting more coverage, and like the rising tide sort of lifts all boats thing. And I think it's also important to realize too, like, obviously this has been sort of criminally underinvested in for many years, again, because they thought that there was no value there, right? That's what's so interesting is like, they meaning money people, they were wrong, right? Unequivocally. And now there's this opportunity. And also, like, speaking of Serena Williams, I have to add this. Serena Williams, when she was giving birth to her baby, is like, I think I'm dying. And they're like, don't worry, you'll be fine. And it turns out she like literally was dying. And they say, you haven't heard this story? Meredith is looking at me with her. Yeah, she almost died giving birth to her baby because she was like, this is really bad pain. I think like I'm dying. And they're like, no, you're fine. You're just having a baby. And she's like, I'm a professional athlete. I'm Serena Williams. Anyways, so she convinced them because she's Serena Williams, and it ended up being okay. But so if you're talking about like how little sort of people trust even professional athletes with their own bodies, which they've spent their entire life with, they still don't trust, right? So you're working against a lot of factors here to get to this point.
You are. Meredith, thank you. You dropped one of our stats in earlier about the likelihood, or let's say the influence of women athletes. If you don't mind, I have a few more that I think are really important for people to kind of get their heads around. So, the first thing is, and I'm sure you've seen at this point, everybody on the planet has seen the t-shirts that say everyone watches women's sports in multiple languages. So it's one thing to see it, and it's another to actually, see the data. So we actually ran a large scale survey with SurveyMonkey back in spring, 14,000 consumers across 7 countries, and found that 73% of consumers say they watch women's sports at least a few times a year, which compares to the 81% who said the same thing about men's sports. So there's only an 8 percentage point difference between viewing patterns. And when you think about that media disparity in terms of the coverage, I mean, that's wild to me. It shows me that women's sports really are becoming mainstream as opposed to being this kind of niche thing. And then we actually saw more men are avid followers of women's sports than women. So I think, the quality
that's cool.
of women's sports, the excitement, you often hear people watching basketball, for example, saying, well, the game is different, but it's like a purer game in some ways because the fundamentals and the strategy and the everything else that happens in the women's game are just really, really compelling. So that, first thing is lots of people are watching women's sports and it's not just women. Secondly, I think the paradox is very clear between the amount of influence that these athletes have and the amount of investment that's being made. So 92% of those we surveyed said it's very important for girls to play sports growing up. 88% said that they see women athletes as role models in society. But 64% say that men have more opportunities in pro sports. 64% said women's sports don't get enough media coverage. And over half say that brands are just not investing enough in women's sports. So it's like, these women are on pedestals and yet the money isn't there yet. The opportunities aren't there yet.
Inherently across the country, there is more emphasis on male sports. There tends to be more of a support system for male sports.
There's a lot of funding towards that, a lot of promotion when it comes to uniforms. I've heard how the female sport teams receive hand-me-downs or cheaper quality uniforms.
And then the last thing, just from a marketing standpoint that stuck out to me, So as Meredith said, women's sports fans are 2.8 times more likely to purchase a product that a woman athlete recommends compared to any other kind of influencer. They could be in beauty, they could be in TV, entertainment, whatever it is, but women athletes are just that much more compelling. That stat, by the way, was as high as 4.9 times in Germany for some reason. And women athletes are just more credible. So 57% of those we surveyed said that they trust that women athletes believe in the products that they're promoting. And that's compared to the 50% who said the same, that they trust male athletes believe in the products that they're promoting. So 7 percentage point credibility boost, if you will, by aligning with women athletes, I thought was pretty interesting because, sports marketing is nothing new. Backing male athletes is certainly nothing new. But actually brands that solely focus their investment there are really missing a ton of opportunity to partner with incredible, inspiring, trustworthy women athletes that can really lift your brand and get the message out there in very memorable ways. And I will now get off my soapbox.
No, I mean, the whole episode is a soapbox, right? But this is like, again, we're trying to shine the light on opportunity, right? It's like, we were talking and I was on my soapbox about creating fiction. And it's the same sort of thing, right? It's like nobody is doing it in B2B. Why? Because it's really hard. Like, that's why. Like, if you could make a consumer grade show that's like as good as anything that's out there, that's like number one in the charts, that has 1 million listeners, like people are like, yeah, I would do that. And then I'm like, oh, we literally did that twice. And they're like, oh yeah, but not for our company. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's the same thing, right? It's like, if Simone Biles is that popular, right? It's like inherently someone who's, let's just say, 50%, 70%, 90% less popular, that person you can go and sponsor too for probably a lot more than 90% less money because everyone is competing.
Actually, I have a story exactly on this thing, Ian. So you mentioned, we've been talking about Simone Biles. Love Simone Biles. She really is the GOAT. So one of her brands, I don't think you mentioned this one, Meredith, is Nulo, which is a pet food company. So she's an ambassador for them. At the beginning of the summer, we ran a campaign with Nulo, and Nulo selected 10 to 12 of our athletes, wide variety of sports, wide variety of followings. They had some target metrics that they wanted to get to in terms of impressions and reach and that sort of thing. But the whole campaign was basically asking these athletes to craft love letters to their pets as part of a sweepstake. And it was one of the most adorable campaigns I've seen. And here was Nulo very smartly, engaging Simone Biles at one end of the spectrum, but then also kind of dipping into that next 99% of athletes with a campaign that allowed them to reach all these different fan bases across different sports, different followers, create different stories, different content, different opportunities. So it's sort of like, you can go all in and spend, 6-7 figures with one athlete, or you can try something a little different, which is to kind of piece that up and reach, really interesting audiences by going a different path.
I love that. And it's such a great idea. And I think that I have a war against stock imagery and stock anything. It's similar to my war of AI generated garbage, where it's like where you win in this world is originality. Like where you win in marketing is you take 1 + 1 and you make it equal 3. Like that is how you win. Like it's so funny. And I've talked about this before, but like everyone idolizes Steve Jobs. And it's like Steve Jobs' message to everyone was, here's to the crazy ones. Like his whole thing was about doing stuff that is different, right? And then marketers do stuff that is the same as their peers because their CFO, it's just easier to get it approved. And it's like, that is part of the thing. It's like, if you go find people that are, inherently underinvested and you invest in them, who do you think is going to carry your brand message further, longer, and louder? Right? The person who needs it or the person who doesn't?
100%. We find athletes are so motivated to do right by their brand sponsors and partners. Like I've seen it time and time again in this role already, where a woman athlete will just go above and beyond. They will deliver extra content afterwards. They're looking to amplify afterwards. Because if the deal goes well, then maybe it translates into an additional deal or kind of a doubling down by that brand. So could not agree more, Ian, just with that that huge opportunity for brands that are willing to just think a little bit outside the box.
So, you've been a CMO a couple times over. Now you're a CEO. You have to think about your marketing investments. This is not something that you have a million case studies for. And I've done very similar type of sales in my life. So I know how difficult it is because every sale is truly one of one, right? There is no drag or drop sale, which again, that's is why it's a good opportunity for marketers, is because you can't just copy someone else, right? Like you can make it your own. But anyways, how did you invest into things like this when you were a CMO? How did you convince leadership that you should do something that nobody else is doing?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on a couple of factors. One was the stage of company I was at and how much discretion I had with my budget. And then the other was, frankly, just the economic cycle, because we all know when the cycle is tighter, your budget gets tighter, you have less leeway. You have to, sometimes justify every dollar. But I will say that, and I was CMO at SurveyMonkey, for example, where we had a decent sized budget, I would say. I always had some money in what I called my rainy day fund or my slush fund that finance and I talked about every time we met up, just to figure out what that fund was. And to my mind, that budget was mine to make discretionary investment where I wanted to try things where, maybe the ROI was less proven or the path was a little less trodden, but it was worth the opportunity, worth that risk to try something different because, God forbid you just become this terrible vanilla marketer that is doing the same as everybody else. You have to find ways to break through. I mean, that's the fun part of marketing. Why wouldn't you? So I always had some experimentation budget just tucked away for when these types of opportunity came up. And, a couple of my leaders who had the bigger budgets tried to do the same thing where they knew that as a marketer, your livelihood depends on being able to find, new channels to replace channels that were once working really well that suddenly stop working, to find ways to stand out from your competitors. Because what happens is if you're doing one thing, then 6 months later, everyone else is probably trying to do it too. So you have to keep trying to keep things fresh. It doesn't mean you have to, devote your entire budget to experimentation. Of course, you need to certainly put money where things are working. But over time, that mix is going to change as a marketer. It just is. And so I think it's smart. It's actually self-preservation in some ways to keep trying to just find ways to experiment on the edges and tap into something that can really give you a fresh perspective in the market.
What does one of these look like? What does an engagement look like? A brand reaches out and they're like, Leela, I want to do something, but I have no idea where to get started or how to do this.
Yeah, that's a conversation we tend to have because I do think the reality, and it's an exciting reality, brands are suddenly going, oh, wait, women's sports, I got to do something. I'm getting some pressure on this, or I'm getting the questions. What do I do? And the truth is, if brands are open to experimenting and finding something that really feels right for the brand and allows them to kind of carve out their own space, then there are so many directions that you can now run in. New leagues springing up, new sports coming to the fore, new athletes with incredibly interesting stories. So if a brand has truly no idea and has the budget to actually spend some time thinking about it, sometimes we'll actually go out and do research for them. We'll look at, their criteria, their audiences, what they're trying to accomplish where. And, we've got a lot of ties into the industry, so we can come back and actually make some recommendations on where it might make sense to focus. That's one kind of path. Another would be if there's, a very clear answer in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. And, they'll give us enough parameters for us to really turn around and think about who from our community of 1,100 and counting athletes is a fantastic brand ambassador for that particular brand because of there's something in that chemistry, whether it's, again, the causes they care about, where they grew up, whether they're gluten-free or a parent or a gamer, just the things they care about naturally. And we always try and find that really true, authentic connection because I firmly believe that's where the best stuff happens when you find that authenticity. So we'll typically, we'll have that conversation with a brand to really surface, okay, what is it you're trying to accomplish? And then we'll come back with a selection of ideas. And, sometimes we call them thought starters because, again, you might be presented with 7 completely different ideas in different sports with, different times of year, different opportunities, different types of athlete. But, in that first instance, we want to kind of give you a sense of what the options are And we often find brands will, they'll click into 2 or 3 things and then we'll go from there and figure out which might be the first thing that they want to try just based on budget and timelines and everything else. So we're really there as creative thought partners because there is so much of this that is new. Unless, you might have been doing, investing in the top 1% of athletes in a very narrow spectrum of sports. But as I said, there's just so much more to explore. And, if you're an up and coming brand, a challenger brand, maybe you don't have the budget to do the obvious things. So then, it really does behoove you to think about, well, how can I do something truly noteworthy? So again, we're kind of there to help be a sounding board for brands, to help provide ideas for them to kind of bat around and take it from there.
I want to circle back to like one elemental part of this, which is, I see a lot of sponsorships sort of like in the podcast world and influencer stuff and the B2B world and B2C world. And I've seen a fair amount of influencer stuff. By no means am I an expert as you are, but there is 2 things that stand out to me as it comes to influencers. Number 1, you have a core part of marketing is tell customer stories. No matter what you're doing on this planet, if you are in marketing, you need to be telling customer stories, right? So that's the first part. The second part is you have celebrities, athletes, influencers, whatever you want to call them, that use your product right now and you don't even know it. And, Leela has 1,100 of them, and they would probably say the words, they're paying me to say this, but they don't even need to, because I would promote this even if they weren't. And like, I'm sure you've heard that 50 times. Like, it happens so often where a brand approaches someone like, hey, whether it's pet food or whether it's, a protein bar or whether it's anything under the sun, and they go, oh, I love this stuff. Like, this is great. I'd happily do it. So like some of that stuff is just like sitting under the surface and it's so accessible and people don't even realize that it's there. But because there's not, mechanisms to do that, right? Like you don't have a parity that you can go to and unearth those things. But you're like, oh, of our 1,100, we have 27 that are like hardcore gamers. Great. This is awesome. Let's promote the new, Red Dead. Not that they would need a bunch more promotion whenever the next one comes out, but you know what I mean? And so like, I just think that that's like, again, when you talk about like hidden opportunities for your marketing team, oh my goodness, what a valuable thing that you can do. Yeah.
And that's exactly the type of thing that we will do with our network. Again, if we're speaking to a brand and they're interested, but yet, they only want people who are, wear their apparel or who have that natural affinity. We'll reach out to our athletes and say, hey, who uses this kind of device, or, do you own this particular clothing brand? And you'll get, there was one streaming platform that we worked with last year and we were able to find 70 or 80 like diehard fans of the shows on that platform. So it's sort of like, and to your point, when you get those people, those athletes, those influencers talking very naturally about something that they find joy in or that they believe in, it's just another level of awesomeness when it comes to sort of ambassadorship or testimonial.
Do you know how many things we've all bought because like a random person on a podcast goes like, I wear whatever, so much stuff. I saw a CMO that I'm friends with that was like, I bought everyone on my team Viore shorts or whatever for joggers for our, SKO or whatever. And everyone was like over the moon happy. And I literally wrote it down in my notes app and bought my wife those joggers for Christmas. You know what I mean? Like, it's so important.
I can stand up and show you my Viore joggers right now if you're like, they're the most comfortable clothing ever. So, and I've raved about them to other people. So that's a very near and dear to my heart example.
Oh, I know. It's like, I was like, I didn't even know they made like, fabrics that exist like this. Silkworms are working overtime or something. So, but it's like, again, there's so many things like that. And it's so influential. It's so important. And I imagine these contracts are very different. And, obviously they can be extremely complex. But you're talking about using them in your marketing. Like we learn this, like, especially in the B2B world, where this stuff is, I think, like really different in a lot of ways. But again, it's, we learned this from back in the day, Salesforce to Dreamforce, putting people's face 60 feet high on hanging it off Moscone. Like, we know what the play is. You put your customers' name in lights with quotes about you and how they love you and spread that far and wide. It ain't rocket science. You know what I mean? Like, and Olympians or gold medalists or professional athletes, you know, like this person can shoot an arrow into a target 500 times out of 600. Like this is cool stuff. Sports are cool. You know what I mean? It's like everyone knows the kid in their hometown who like sort of almost maybe made it. And like this person is probably better than that person by 1,000 times, you know, like it's very, I think that the reason why people trust athletes is because they know exactly that they have gone through something so difficult to get to where they are. And and their body is a temple, even if it's not, right? And yet, you know, here they are, right? And I just feel like that's why people trust, you know, people. Whereas like an influencer who's funny on TikTok is like, that's great too, but they're making you laugh. But it's just a little different when they promote something.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's something in the admiration for what that athlete has been through, because every elite athlete has put in so much work to get where they are. Every athlete has faced adversity. They overcome whatever obstacles it is, whether it's injury or, you know, anything else that has been a blocker to them. And, you know, one of the things I love about Olympic summers and Paralympic summers is just you see these, you know, some athletes in niche sports who get their time to shine, get the chance to take the spotlight, do incredible things and reap the rewards. And we've had a really fun summer with a pair of synchronized divers whose names are Cassidy Cook and Sarah Bacon. Together, their hashtag is Cook and Bacon. And they have really, you know, in addition to being the US's first medal this Olympics, they won a silver in the 3-meter synchro diving championships or contest. They have really scored big time with brands. So we've been able to do some really fun synchronized bacon flipping with Hormel. They're currently doing a new promotion or a new contest with First Watch, the breakfast joint. So their other hashtag is breakfast is served. And they're just creating really fun content. You know, picture bacon and egg floaties in the pool. And, you know, today they launched a cannonball contest as part of this. You know, it's just so much fun to watch these athletes who've worked so hard to get where they got, worked through all kinds of things, have their moment, get their medals, and now be able to, you know, I guess cash in a little bit on the success that they're having in a really fun, authentic way. You can just tell they're having fun with these consumer brands. So I think, you know, hopefully B2B brands look at that and realize, well, maybe the storytelling option isn't quite as obvious as a cook and bacon for breakfast products, but there are so many stories waiting to be told. And, you know, again, if you're willing to be creative about the types of athlete that you work with, there are always athletes that can be within budget that can do some incredible storytelling for you.
I love that. And there is always someone within budget, which is the fun part. Final piece for me on this is, I think it's also important to just remember that these are their actual lives and their actual, like, you know, visage and their actual likeness and all that. You know, we at Caspian work with a lot of actors. And one of the things that I always talk to brands about is I'm like, someday you will not work at this company. They will always be themselves, right? So like, no matter what, if they endorse a product, if they endorse, you know, whatever it is, obviously it doesn't define them as a person, but like always the tie goes to them, right? It's like, it doesn't go to the brand. And I just think that there's a lot of respect and admiration and excitement that you get to put into that type of relationship as a brand. And I think that part feels really good because you know exactly who you're supporting and you're putting bacon and eggs on the table for them. And it's really special. And like, you get to be a part of their life forever. And I think that is like literally the fun part of marketing, doing creative things, doing stuff out of the box and making something special. And so I think it's just an important part that it doesn't feel like something that you just chucked money into, you know, Google or Meta or something like that and hope that you get a, you know, 0.25 ROI at the end of it. It's something that like you literally made a little difference in the world. And I can tell you personally, it feels really good because I've done it. And your customers and prospects feel that too. They do, because then they talk about it and they bring it up to you. And then they go, what was it like working with that person? Tell me all the details. You know what they never do? What was it like working on that Google Ads campaign? Tell me the details.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, one thing I've heard a few times over the summer at different events is brands talking about their sports marketing investments, saying, well, we're not just slapping a logo on it. So I think that like slapping a logo on it is sort of the equivalent of running the Google ad or whatever, I think in sports marketing now. So brands really are taking stock of the fact that it is about, there's this incredible storytelling opportunity. It's not just about being seen with an athlete, that like you have to create a story, you have to create a moment, a talking point. There's so much opportunity, and sports are fun. They're inspiring, but they're also fun. There's that real opportunity to lean into the personality of these athletes. To your point, Ian, they're not, two-dimensional sporting machines. They are whole people. I mean, there's all sorts of different angles that you have with any spokesperson, any partner that you're working with. And I think that's just a great opportunity for marketers to explore, so they go beyond the good old slapping of the logo and find something that really resonates, that does become that talking point with their customers.
One of the big things that when I've worked with sort of big influencers that people are always worried about is the social posts. They're like, well, how many times are they going to post? And are they going to post this? And are they going to say the right things? I just got to say, that's not the value. It's not the value. You get to put them in your marketing, if that's what your contract says. You get to put them in your marketing. Your marketing is going to be 5,000 times more effective than the one social post or the Instagram story or whatever it is. Like, that is the value, not the single post. Like, get that out of your heads, people. I don't know how to, like, it doesn't matter that much. Like, granted, Kim K tweets about you or posts about you on Instagram. Yeah, I get it. You can make millions of dollars. I understand that. But for smaller influencers who don't have the massive following or all that stuff, like, it's not a single post. It's about a holistic campaign that you can do 1,000 different activities with. And I think that just like not being sort of like myopic about how you think about a single social post, like that's not what we're doing here.
Preach, Ian, preach. No, I for sure. I mean, it just, and it's not even the number of activities either. It really is like, how do you find that sweet spot where the athlete is doing something that they really believe in, they can lean into, they can have fun with? I mean, again, I encourage brands to, brainstorm with us or whatever partner they're working with to, even, think through it with the athlete and figure out if there's some other angles. To me, yeah, the single post is kind of, it's a bit useless. Well, I mean, it's a little bit like advertising, right? I mean, how many times do you need to get an impression before something sticks with you? One is not going to be enough. But if there's a super memorable story, or if you have the opportunity to meet that athlete at an event or something like that, that's a very different experience. That will stick with you. That will resonate in a different way.
Totally agree. Leela, wonderful having you on the show. Everybody check out PARITY. Obviously, y'all are the best. Any final thoughts? Anything to plug?
No, I think I just, having spent so much time in the marketing trenches, like I love marketing. I still do a ton of marketing as part of my role. And I genuinely mean this. We want to help as many companies as possible crack women's sports, figure out what's the right way for them to play. So I'm very findable on LinkedIn. And that's probably the best way to try and hit me up. If you just want to brainstorm sometime like that, we live for that. And we have 1,100 plus athletes that they're ready to work with you. So please don't be shy if we can be any help. Thanks. Great to see you.
Well, that's it for today. I hope you got some good ideas for your B2B content. Thank you for listening to Remarkable. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. Remarkable is created by the team at Caspian Studios, B2B podcast as a service. Caspian also creates fiction series for B2B companies, so if you want a business thriller, you can learn more at caspianstudios.com. Hollywood-style storytelling for B2B. And in today's episode, you heard from myself, Ian Faison, and Meredith O'Neill, senior producer here at Caspian Studios. Remarkable was produced this week by Meredith O'Neill, mixed by Scott Goodrich, and our theme song is Solomon by Falak. Be remarkable and rise above the noise.